Hello, slightly belated Happy New Year. Hope you're all well. I've been slightly constrained in my mobility for a couple of months. Combination of gravity and motorbikes sometimes doesn't work out too well, but hey, things are improving. Recently I've gone back to playing a lot of Balance of Powers, which if you saw it was one of my top 10 games. I was contacted by somebody online who was very keen to give it a go, so we did a couple of learning scenarios to get the basic mechanics down, and then piled into the campaign game. I persuaded him to not add in the naval part of the game, or initially the third map, or Africa. So we're just playing the Great War campaign scenario with the two main maps. The other thing was we wanted to use, or I was very keen to use, and the chap was very happy to oblige, was to use the house rules, which it's about a page and a half of sort of tweaks and a few sort of clarifications as well, which I was never certain about, but pretty sure I had right. So it was just a case of let's get those nailed down before we start. So that was all good, and we're about to start our fourth campaign game. The last game we did actually add in Africa, just for a bit of extra colour. I think it's fine. It's a bit of history, which is nice to see in the game. I don't think there's any great surprises, but it was a very good chance to do a full shakedown of these house rules, which I believe have improved the game. Clearly unbiased, but I was just going to talk through in this video the two main, what I would consider to be the two main house rule parts, which I suppose change the game more than I guess the rest put together, because the rest are really very minor. So I'm going to talk about those two now, and then I'm going to do another video probably on my thoughts on strategy, because there's a lot to consider in this game. In fact, I would rate Balance of Powers as probably the best of the strategic World War I games I've played. I mean, I've played the Great War in Europe, which I liked at the time, divisional, maybe a bit clunky in parts. The flip-flop thing was designed for effect, I suppose. Either you liked it or you didn't. I liked the events that were in the game. I guess they eventually found their way into Paths of Glory, which I also like, but it hasn't got quite the same scope as the others, because it's point to point. I've played the original Decision games, World War One, which is okay. Never really got into La Grande Guerre. I looked at Empires and Alliances from Compass Games, and equally they've done two more, haven't they? Compass Games. Illusions of Victory. Attrition of Souls was the later one, and the Lamps Are Going Out, and they're both essentially area movement games, which looks quite interesting, but still didn't quite have the same scope and options for manoeuvre as I think you get with a full hex game. So the things that concern me a little bit about Balance of Powers, the main two things were the order of battle. Essentially in the game you get monthly reinforcements essentially at the start, which are free and they just arrive at no cost. And then you also get what's called seasonal reinforcements, which have to be purchased, and they go into essentially into the dead pile, and they're optional. So a lot of the lower quality units never get built. I mean, certainly the Russians tend to build a 3-3 and a 2-3 and leave it at that. So they're getting what, 16 RPs a season. So you're going to get 3 builds. So a 3-3 and a 2-3 is 4. So that's spending 12 per season. And then you've got a few RPs for maybe some attacks or for some moving units by rail. So a lot of the 1-2s and the cavalry that turn up, which as far as I understand it, they were actual units, they just sit there dormant in the dead pile, never seeing the light of day, because there's really no reason to build them. So the solution which I've tried, which I think works, is that when you get seasonal reinforcements, they go into a seasonal dead pool, essentially. Just keep them separate from the main dead pool, and you have to build these units before you are allowed to rebuild any from the normal dead pool. Now that all sounds very expensive, but as compensation, all these units, and I'm playing with any air unit, any ground unit, cavalry, infantry, doesn't matter. They'll have to be rebuilt, but it's at half price. So all those 0-4 Russian cavalry units, all those 1-2s, all that stuff which would just tend to hang around, never getting built, now must be built at least once. They will appear at half price during the game, and it does change the feel of the game, I guess, particularly on the Eastern Front. I mean, the history that I've read, it talks about the Russian hordes, quantity having a quality all of itself, all that kind of stuff. You never really saw it, for me anyway, as the game was published, because you just didn't build them. They just didn't make an appearance. Now they do, and it seems to even out. I mean, there's probably a slightly bigger seasonal rebuild pool for the Entente, so maybe they get a bit of a break because they're getting more stuff back cheaply. But it seems to work. So we're just about to go into a 4th campaign game. We've had wins from both sides. So that is one of the 2 main areas of concern I had, and I think that's a fix. Seems to be at the moment. And the second one was combat resolution for entrenched units. So if you played the game, you'll know that if the defender has an entrenched corps in its stack, he'll get the entrenched bonus for the nation, and he also needs to choose an effectiveness unit. He's got the full choice, he can choose any. It doesn't have to be the one that's entrenched. And when you take losses, you can choose what you want, with the only restriction being the first loss must come from the unit that was chosen for your effectiveness. So if you imagine a stack of, let's say, five corps, one of them is entrenched, could be a relatively poor unit, maybe a level 2 unit. You've got a level 3 unit which is mobile. You can choose that as your effectiveness unit. That will affect the DRM. If the attacker rolls well and gets a gained round result, you can take all the losses on the mobile units. provided you didn't choose the effectiveness unit as your lead unit. And you have an entrenched unit which remains, so you hold the hex and the attacker places a breach marker. So why would you ever have more than one entrenched unit in a hex? I just couldn't get my head around why you'd ever do that. So the house rule I use, which again it seems to tick the box, is that the effectiveness unit must be one of the entrenched units, and thereby that limits your quality. It must be an entrenched unit. So if you've got a poorer unit as your entrenched unit, then you're going to get a worse DRM potentially, because if you've got better units that are mobile, you're not going to get the benefit of those. And that kind of rings true, because the front line is the entrenched position. It's the units in that entrenched position that are meeting the attack of the enemy. You can still attempt to get a reserve from an adjacent hex, and that will act in the usual way, but that initial selection must come from an entrenched unit. And then as regards losses, the first loss must be on the unit chosen for its effectiveness, and every other loss must be also from an entrenched unit. So now a 1-2 gain ground result means that the entrenched unit would go, one of the mobile units would go, and then you're only left with mobile units, so they would have to retreat. So if you really want to hang on to a hex, or you want to increase your chances of keeping the hex, you need to have 2 units entrenched for the 1-2 result. If you get a 1-3 result, if the attacker can get a net 11, then you're looking at the first and third losses being from the entrenched units. So you would need to have 3 entrenched units to survive some of the more extreme rolls. So I'm just going to show a little demonstration of that on the map with some pieces, and then that'll be all. So here we are, typically on the Western Front. Now let's say this was maybe the start of the von Schlieffen plan. We've got the Germans, and maybe this guy's mobile as well, so we've got a stack of these 5 German mobile units attacking the French, and we'd see here, if we were playing the rules as written, the effectiveness would be a 3 on both sides, typically the best German and the best French guy. So that would be a 0 net for that. There's no odds to be accounted for, and the French are entrenched, so they've got -2. So quite a tough attack. If the Germans manage to roll well, even with their -2, if they've got an 11, say, which would be a net 9, the result is a 1-2 gain ground. So what would happen is that the French would need to lose 2 units. The first one would obviously be its effectiveness unit. So the 3 would go. They would then choose the next one to go, another mobile unit. The French hold the hex. All of the Germans would become entrenched because they haven't got their TI ability yet. So all these guys would flip to entrench. They'd get a breach marker, and the French would hold the hex. Now, there was no incentive for them in that situation to have more than one entrenched unit. It made no difference at all. With the house rule tweak, let's go back to the initial situation. If it was like this, then The Germans, again 3 effectiveness. Now the French must use the effectiveness of the entrenched unit. These are the guys in the front line. These are the ones that have to stop that initial attack. And they're not first line units, they're second line units. So now the French have only got a -1 because you've got 3 versus 2 effectiveness, still got the -2 for the trench, so it's a net -1. So now if the Germans threw a 10 for a net 9, the first one that goes must be the entrenched unit, next one of their choice, presumably a 2-3, and these 2 guys have got to retreat. Now, it wasn't a breakthrough result, so it's still a trench battle, so you still mark the hex with a trench battle marker, which signifies that no other units are allowed to enter the hex apart from those that were attacking. These guys would all become entrenched, even though they cleared the hex because it wasn't a breakthrough. They're all rules as per. They've got to lose their 1 guy, would be the effectiveness unit that the Germans use, so that would go. And then they'd be in here with a trench battle marker. And that would be how that would be resolved. Now if we look at the alternative, go back to the Germans with their 5 corps, and the French, maybe they've still only got, maybe this guy's turned up on the last turn, he's moved 3 into that hex, so he hasn't got entrenched yet. Again, the Germans attack, they've got a net, still got a net -1, so they roll a 10, net 9, it's a 1-2 result. First hit from the entrenched guy, the German guy's got to die. The second hit is your choice, the 2-3 presumably. The other mobile unit has to retreat. This guy's left holding the field. So now you're left with this situation. So that's the incentive to have more than one entrenched defender, which never existed before, and I think it tends to give a more realistic feel to the battles. I mean, if you want to be really safe, you need to entrench three guys, because if you only have 2 guys entrenched, and should the French get lucky and roll a 12, or potentially, let's go back to here, maybe they've got some infrastructure to support their attack, or some siege guns, or they've got maybe Mackinson's also leading the attack, and he's passed his check, he's rolled a 4 or less. So now they've got +1 for effectiveness, +1 for the infrastructure, which you use. He passes, another +1, that's a net +3. -2 is now a net +1. So if you can roll a 10, that's a 1-3 result. First loss, second loss, third loss. Every other one has to be an entrenched unit. He has to run away. He dies. These guys move in. Trench battle. They're all very different. That of course can be countered by spending more time entrenching, more time defending, makes the hex tougher to take, which to me feels right. So we've got this set up, even with an 11, 1 hit, 2 hits, 3 hits, still hold the hex. Entrenched battle, one of those dies. So that's how we've been playing it. I think it's worth adopting. I like the feel. It feels a more realistic representation. There's a few wheels within wheels, trying to get to a defensive line sooner, so you've got more chance to entrench more units to hold on to it, with more strength. Yeah, quite like it. So it's all listed in the house rules, and just let me know what you think.